I've read the entire lawsuit documentation about YOLA versus USA Pickleball so that you don't have to. And let me just say, if anybody from USA Pickleball is watching this video, you guys are so and I mean, we all saw this coming. What did you guys think was actually going to happen as a nonprofit organization taking on a global sports company? Sorry, where are my manners? How's it going, y'all? I'm Rafa, the Pickleball Tech Dude. I'm an ex-PPA employee, a Harvard-educated engineer, and a seasoned pickleball product tester. I've been following the YOLA versus USA Pickleball saga very closely over the last several weeks, and today we have the most important development by far. This is probably the 5th or 6th video I've made about this issue with the Gen 3s and USAP bans, so if you're not caught up to everything up until June 6th, make sure you go and watch the playlist that I've created and come back because you're not going to want to miss what I have to say. Now for the rest of you, let's jump into what's happened today. Get the smaller thing out of the way, which it's crazy to call this the smaller thing, but you saw in my last video that VATIC Pro remained fairly uncertain about whether or not their ONI, which uses Gen 3 construction technology, would remain on the USA Pickleball approved list. And unfortunately, we saw a few days ago that there was a statement released from VATIC Pro that their ONI was being delisted. That really sucked to hear. I really thought the first batch ONIs were some of the best looking paddles on the market, with the dragon design on the front looks so sick. But unfortunately, not going to be able to use those in USA Pickleball sanctioned play. It's tough to make a judgment call right now with a power paddle because of all of this going on with USA Pickleball not releasing any standards or metrics of the coefficient of restitution tests that they're using. And trust me, that's going to come up several times today. So let's not waste any more time and let's jump into the biggest development of today. Now, earlier when I said I read the entire documentation, I meant that. I'm going to throw up a picture of what my whiteboard looks like right now after reading all roughly 190 paragraphs of the lawsuit. Now, while there's a lot of arguments here, I'm going to do my best to synthesize the most important ones, and I'm going to save all of my thoughts for the end. Otherwise, we're going to be here for 25 minutes. All right, so starting off with the case statement, YOLA said that they've made over 100,000 paddles since their USA Pickleball approval, and they admit fault for not submitting the right paddles in the first place. Now, regarding the ban, they said that USA Pickleball didn't notify them until 5 days prior to launch, and that their COO has said repeatedly that no matter how many times they resubmit paddles, they're never going to approve them. Obviously, YOLA is trying to make the argument that this delisting was done through illegal measures or at least against the rules of USA Pickleball, and so they're suing for at least $200 million in damages and to also get full approval for all of their Gen 3 models. Now for the main body of the documentation, I'm going to take you on a little journey. Apparently, YOLA was setting up the infrastructure to mass produce these paddles on a much larger scale than any other paddle drop in history. Regardless of the original paddles approved in September 2023, the paddles submitted for similarity testing approval were done in November of 2024. And from December 2023 to May 2024, YOLA produced about 150,000 paddles with a retail value of over $70 million. There's also a meeting between YOLA and USA Pickleball in January of 2024, which would have been only a couple of months after they started production, and allegedly USAP did not have any concerns at the time about the paddles. So we get to May of 24, 5 months after these paddles were approved, and allegedly this is when USAP decides to come forward with the fact that these paddles violate Regulation 2E6F in their manufacturing rulebook, which prohibits spring-like characteristics to paddles. According to YOLA, during this time, USA Pickleball also takes advantage and pushes forward the narrative that these paddles are dangerous. And when YOLA comes forth asking for concrete evidence to back up this claim and wonders why they haven't been covered under Rule 2F1 in USAP's handbook, stating that they should get an 18-month notice prior to a delist, which covers paddles even if they've been materially changed in the real words of the law, USA Pickleball, in YOLA's words, grasping for straws, cites their marketing to exhibit the catapult effect that the paddles have. This is when YOLA clarifies two things. Firstly, YOLA clarifies that the wrong paddles submitted were from an initial batch of Gen 3s they received in October of 2023. They state it's very common for a company's first batch to not quite meet their specifications, and that these in particular had extra foam on the edges. They state that they caught this by mid-October 2023, and that all manufacturing errors were corrected by the end of the year, which is still about a month after they started mass producing, if you remember that they started in December of 2023. So that's something to think about. And secondly, this is when YOLA begins to speculate that USA Pickleball was looking for reasons to fail YOLA, and that other paddle companies that are sponsors of USA Pickleball might have been involved as well. They also cite their grievance with the initial delisting, which I don't understand how that's possible when they literally submitted the wrong paddles by their own admission in the first place. YOLA goes on to say a few things to back up this claim that USAP was plotting against them all along. YOLA submitted 9 paddles in their resubmission for approval, and they state that USA Pickleball created an impromptu rule that if a single prototype failed the surface roughness test, that they would fail them all, which I know for a fact is not something that's been applied to companies in the past. They go on to attack USA Pickleball's surface roughening procedure using a Start SR160 machine, which YOLA calls cheap and inaccurate. YOLA claims that they did their own in-house testing during which all of their paddles passed surface roughness testing, and they also exhibited that the paddles only had 5 to 10% variance in foam. And lastly, they state that several of the paddles on the USAPA list have higher exit velocities than their Gen 3s. So from this, we can glean that USAP's main grievances against the Gen 3s were the surface roughness, the amount of foam, and the exit velocities. So to recap where we're at, allegedly, USA Pickleball originally through their own data and testing passes these paddles. Then they come back without data and attempts to decertify them. And when YOLA challenges that, USA Pickleball allegedly creates new rules to make sure that they would fail. USAP's response to those claims were that there was an issue in the procurement of the paddles in the first place that impacted them being able to see the full effect of the foam, and that upon the real testing of the paddles that they failed the new coefficient of restitution test and a full span deflection test. But this is where YOLA allegedly really had all their ducks in a row. Supposedly, they come back to USA Pickleball with comparison data between the new paddles submitted and the paddles approved in September 2023, showing that they are very similar and that they should therefore be approved. And this is where USAP COO Malouf comes in and goes, not so fast. These paddles in 2023 were actually not tested properly and therefore do not serve as a valid basis of similarity for you to pass these paddles. And the last thing that YOLA covers in the lawsuit before we get to the counts is the damage that their reputation has gone through. They state very validly how USA Pickleball has delisted other paddles and yet has gone out of their way to make full statements only about YOLA's paddles and to go and propagate this narrative that their paddles are unsafe. In other words, YOLA in legal jargon has said, the other kids are making fun of me. Alright, so that was all a lot, but to round this out, these are the actual counts that were levied against USAP. Count 1 is breach of contract for not applying Rule 2F1 to give YOLA 18 months of notice. Count 2 is tortious interference of contract when USAP allegedly made up these new tests to assure that the YOLA paddles would fail. Count 3 is tortious interference with prospective business relationships when propagating these narratives damaged YOLA's business. Count 4 is promissory estoppel, essentially USAP rug pulling their approval even though they knew YOLA was mass producing paddles based on that designation. Count 4 is negligent misrepresentation, mostly referring to the level of testing that USAP was doing and how reliable it is. The last count is my favorite. Count 6 is fraud, which essentially is putting the onus on USAP for approving illegal paddles for sale to the public. It's kind of a genius move from YOLA when they're the ones who have been accused of selling illegal paddles. They're saying, well, we only sold illegal paddles because this company didn't do their due diligence in approving them in the first place. So at long last, all of that's what you need to know about what was in the documentation. It all rounds off with YOLA seeking $100 million plus interest, $100 million punitive damages, putting their paddles on the USAPA list, and of course, all of their legal fees. Now, obviously, I have several thoughts about this, and I might need to save some of these for another video, but there's a few key things as they pertain to each of these two organizations that I think we need to pay attention to as the lawsuit moves forward. Starting with YOLA, they admit to being notified 5 days prior to the official launch on April 16th that their paddles had some concerns about them. In my mind, that's plenty of time to delay that launch. The argument is obviously that they've already made the paddles and made 150,000 of them and have sold tens of thousands of dollars in inventory to third-party distributors already, but that's what every other company getting delisted right now is having to deal with. Right now, Rhombus and VATIC Pro just have mass inventory of these paddles that they can't even sell. Next, YOLA full-on admitted to submitting the wrong paddles and that it was due to a manufacturing error that was resolved by the end of 2023. I pause on this for a second, but that coincides with a month after they started their mass production. So in my mind, I'm wondering if some of those paddles are actually in circulation. And lastly, YOLA is basically openly admitting to how bad their QC issues are. I mean, a difference of 10% in variance of foam from paddle to paddle has insane implications for the power. That's something that should absolutely not be allowed or justified. But now the reason I think USAP is screwed is because they have so many more allegations and questions that are valid and they need to answer. These are included but not limited to: how did they approve those paddles in November of 2024 when YOLA admittedly said they had significantly more foam in them? And then why did they not say anything during that January 2024 meeting? If Rule 2F1 does indeed protect companies even if their paddles are materially different, then how does YOLA not fall under that? Did USAP in fact make up new rules for JOOLA? Because they have published no data about any thresholds or new tests that they're doing. What is going to happen with these other paddles that obviously have higher exit velocities than the JOOLA Gen 3s, and many of us can name these off the top of our heads? And validly, why did they go out of their way to destroy JOOLA when several other companies are failing the same tests? Maybe it was retaliation for the initial statement that JOOLA made, but that seems very retaliatory and a little bit unjustified for me. Man, my mouth is dry. I don't want to keep you here too much longer. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video or you learned something and you want to keep up with the updates as they keep coming. Let me know down in the comments what questions you think each of these organizations have to answer now that all this info is out in the public domain. That's going to conclude this chapter in the saga so far, and I'll catch you guys probably in another one. Peace.